Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how's it going today?
It is going fantastic today. Super excited about this episode. I hope everyone out there is feeling just as fantastic as I am. You seem a little pensive. I feel like you're nervous about something. How are you?
I'm doing great. I might have been a little bit nervous at the beginning of this interview with our guest today, but I am not nervous now. We spoke with the fabulous Charlotte Laws from the Most Hated Man on the Internet docu-series that was recently released by Netflix. It is just a fantastic 3-part docu-series about revenge porn, and Charlotte plays a central role.
Yes, she plays a central role in taking down the individual Hunter Moore, who had a website called areyouup.com. This happened 10 years ago, a little bit more than 10 years ago, where people would submit scandalous nudes of their significant other or somebody that they just wanted to seek revenge on, somebody that they wanted to negatively impact their lives, and it ruined lives. Hunter targeted the wrong individual when he targeted Kayla Laws, Charlotte's daughter. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, and if it wasn't for that moment, who knows what he would be doing today. But Charlotte took him down with the assistance of the FBI, her husband, who's a lawyer, and another individual who ultimately was the person who shut down, like physically shut down the website, James McGibney. He has a website called Bullyville. 100% of it is dedicated to fighting bullying in every aspect of life.
Absolutely, and he's an interesting character. The docuseries is really great. I urge you to check that out, but I don't think you need to have watched it to enjoy this interview with Charlotte. She's also an author and has written some really cool books. One called Undercover Debutante, one called Devil in the Basement. There's Rebel in High Heels and Meet the Stars, dating back to 1988, which we asked her about at the beginning of this interview. Just a great conversation.
And you can check out everything that she does on charlottelaws.org, and you can buy her books on Amazon.
And if you like what you hear on Crawlspace, maybe you want to hear it without the ads. You can check out crawlspace.supportingcast.fm, and you can get every single episode of Crawlspace ad-free, as well as a bonus show called the Crawlspace Crypt that we do weekly.
I'm going to try a different tactic here, and I'm going to go reverse psychology. You don't want that. You like the ads. You want the ads. As a matter of fact, we're going to put in several more ad markers into each episode. We're going to load it up. It's going to be mostly ads. See, just because we know that that's what you want. And you don't want additional content like a peek behind the scenes, the going-ons at Crawlspace Media. Essentially, it's some of the most boring stuff that we have out there. So I would stay far away from it.
You're right. They definitely don't want to hear my Mothman slam poem.
When you recited that Mothman slam poem to me earlier today, it was definitely not the highlight of my day. I was hoping you would just stop halfway through.
And you can access that at crawlspace.supportingcast.fm.
But you won't.
Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Follow us on social media at Crawlspace Pod or Crawlspace Podcast.
And now we're going to break for one of those ads that you love.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Charlotte Laws, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
I have literally 50,000 questions for you, but we're going to try to keep it to a reasonable amount of time here for this episode. We don't often have someone who was ranked on Buzzfeed as one of the fiercest women. I think the particular year was 2013. We don't often have people like that on the show. So now it's just all babble coming out of my mouth right now. You're witnessing me being intimidated.
You don't need to be.
Can you first tell us about your books? You're a prolific author and have some really cool books.
Sure. I have 2 memoirs, and they cover different periods of my life. And one is called Rebel in High Heels, which tells about the revenge porn story and tells about the first 20 years of my life. And then the other memoir is called Undercover Debutante. And that tells about pretty much age 20 until about age 40. And it also covers tracking down my birth parents, which was a huge feat because the records were closed in Georgia, which is the state where I was raised. So those are my 2 memoirs. I also have a nonfiction novel called Devil in the Basement, which is about my birth grandfather, who I tracked down that whole family. So this was my birth mom's dad. And he was killed by a devil worshiper in 1948 in West Virginia. And he was also the victim of prejudice because I'm Italian, part Italian. He was fully Italian. And that was something that was a problem back in the 1930s, 1940s. There was a great deal of prejudice. So he was kicked out of 2 law offices, and he was kicked out of his house because the CC&R said no Italians, no Blacks. There was a whole list. So he had to actually move because of that. So that whole story is told in that book. And then I have an academic book I did when I was getting my PhD at USC. On animal advocacy and Spinoza. And then my first book back in the 1980s was called Meet the Stars. And that was about how to get into any event, meet anybody, get in touch with well-known people, whether you want to go to a fancy event, whether you want to get a job with Steven Spielberg, whether you want to date somebody, whatever it was you were looking for, kind of how to do things, kind of outside of the box to get yourself into that position. Those are my books that I've written. And I've done a lot of articles too.
You were described as being multi-occupational. You've listed out, I think there was like 30-something occupations that you've tackled. How did you decide that that was going to be the path that you were going on?
I never did anything differently. I mean, I kind of always dabbled in different professions. To me, it was interesting. It was stimulating. I personally kind of get bored with one thing after a while. And then I kind of want to experience something new and see what other people are doing and what their experiences are in a different profession. And so I just kind of fell into all these different fields, and I, was flexible enough to be able to say yes. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, there's been a lot of them.
When you decided to write Devil in the Basement, was that a choice you made because you felt like you needed to tell the story of a little bit of your lineage as well?
Well, it was an amazing story. I mean, it was just shocking, and really no one had ever written about it, which was also quite amazing. And so I flew to West Virginia. I talked to cousins. I talked to relatives of the devil worshiper. There was a double murder suicide. So I talked to the family of the woman who also had been killed. There was also a bomb that the devil worshiper set off in this little town. I mean, it's really kind of an amazing story. And then my great aunt was the mistress of Billy Jack Giacalone, who was one of the top mobsters in Detroit. So that's kind of a sub story. And he is credited with possibly or probably being the person who killed Jimmy Hoffa. So the FBI considers him the #1 suspect. So that's kind of an interesting little story as well. So yeah, I just thought this is an amazing story, and I can't believe no one has ever told this story. I just felt like I needed to do it.
Well, I can't believe that we've been doing this particular show for so many years, and 5 minutes into this interview, we just solved Jimmy Hoffa's murder.
I know. It's amazing.
I'm going to move on now. I'm calling it quits. I'm retiring.
We're retiring. Another incredible story is told in the docu-series, The Most Hated Man on the Internet, that you participated in. Let me just say, amazing work in that documentary and everything that came with that documentary. Can you tell us a little bit about the documentary and your experience?
The documentary, I think, is very well put together. I think the filmmakers did an excellent job, and it tells the story of what my family went through. Is one of the main themes of the story. It tells about what Hunter Moore, he had a website which, humiliated victims. It was really about ruining lives, trying to drive people to suicide. He called his group the family. It was a cult. He was the father. His followers were the children. He had 600,000 followers on Twitter at that time. And people would say, I will do anything for you, Father. I will kill for you, Father. It was really quite amazing. And so my daughter, who was 24 at the time, got hacked. And a few days later, her topless picture got loaded onto Hunter's website. And she had never sent the picture to anyone. And she called me in tears. And when she found out about it, she was at her waitress job. And that's the first time I'd ever heard of revenge porn or Hunter Moore. And I looked at the website and realized that it was important to get that picture down immediately. And so I began this mission to do that. And it was grueling. It was extremely difficult because Hunter refused to remove the content. And I also questioned, my daughter was hacked, but then she very quickly found that one of her friends was also on the site, and she called her friend, and her friend said that she had also been hacked. I thought to myself, well, this is curious because the media is all saying this, this is disgruntled exes, and I only know 2 people on the site and they were both hacked. So I thought there's probably a hacking scheme here. So what I did is I chose about 40 victims who were all posted within this 2-week period of when my daughter was posted. And I contacted them, which was really difficult because I was scared that there might be a hacker on their electronics. So everything had to be done by phone. And so I would sometimes have to just look at their last name, see the city they lived in, and then call somebody with the same last name and say, are you related to this person? Could you have them call me? It was roundabout. It was really difficult. But after I did my little study of 40 people, I found out that 40% of them had been hacked. That's when I had all this information along with the victims who had been hacked. I had their emails and phone numbers and their data. And so I was able to give that to the FBI eventually. And luckily they agreed to take the case. And Hunter was publicly denying the hacking when I eventually came forward and accused him of it in the media. And the media were mostly glorifying him. He was like this cool dude who had this innovative, new business model. Oh, Hunter, let's give you the headlines. Let's put your big picture everywhere. Oh, Rolling Stone, yes, we're going to do a feature of you. Oh, we're going to put you on Anderson Cooper. So he was, it was all going to his head anyway, that he had this God complex going. The victims, it was victim blaming from everybody. It was the media, law enforcement, regular people. Well, you're just a slut if you have a topless picture. Even if you didn't send it to anyone, you're just a slut. It's your fault. You shouldn't have taken the picture in the first place. That's what we got from everybody. And it was an uphill battle because it was before the Me Too movement. So there was no sympathy for the victims back then.
And you had mentioned that the media, they promoted him. I mean, they enabled him, and it was really gross watching that and seeing that footage from back then and seeing that there was absolutely, because you said it was before the Me Too movement, there was this insane toxic masculinity that was going on, and it was being enabled, and I never saw it at the time. And then watching the documentary, I realized that was all around me. And I didn't realize what it was until you see it under the microscope that the documentary puts it under. And then you see your laser focus on stopping this. I watched it. I kind of felt bad. I kind of peripherally knew about it, but because of the information I was getting, it didn't seem like it was as bad as it really was. The documentary does a great job showing you like, hey, look back at these things in history and take the lesson. Even if it's 10, 15, 20 years later, take the lesson and say, we kind of screwed up. And it took someone like you to put it on the right path.
Yeah, I think they do a great job in the documentary showing, making you kind of feel what it was like back then. I mean, you really get immersed in it. And I think that was excellent because I think people who were removed otherwise wouldn't really get it. They wouldn't really feel what that whole cult was like.
And actually, there's one point where I looked over to my significant other and I was like, ugh, I can smell him.
And how did you go about proving that your daughter had been hacked?
First, I went to the Los Angeles Police Department and they did the victim blaming. It was a middle-aged female detective. And she said to my daughter, why would you take a picture like this unless you wanted it on the internet? So she blamed my daughter for that. So then I called the FBI. The FBI initially didn't want to take the case. They said that just file a report online, which I knew meant that they were too busy with other cases and wouldn't do anything. So I said to them sarcastically, I said, oh, I see, you help Scarlett Johansson when she gets hacked, but you don't help the average person. And the operator just sighed and said, I'll transfer you to a detective. And so I got transferred. And then they said 3 agents would be coming to the house later in the month. So it was weeks later when they showed up and they walked in and said, the chances are very slim that we'll be able to take this case. They said, normally we take cases only when there's a lot of money that's lost. And even if we do get approval to take it, it always takes us over a year to do our investigation. So it's a very, very long process. And they just started going through the electronics, Kayla's electronics and my daughter's electronics. They came back a second and a third time. In fact, the third time I had a victims meeting. So I got some of the victims to come into my house to meet directly with the FBI agents. I had other victims who were accessible by phone. And we had my husband, who's an attorney there. We also had another attorney who was a porn industry attorney. He said the porn industry is very upset about revenge porn and wants to eradicate it. They were very upset because it's bad for business. It hurts their bottom line as well. And the meeting was also to decide whether we wanted to bring a civil suit against Hunter Moore, whether we wanted to, what we wanted to do legally, if anything. I had asked Facebook to actually fund a lawsuit on behalf of victims, and they had been trying to decide whether they were going to do it or not. And ultimately they decided against it because they said it would lead to a slippery slope where everybody would ask them to finance lawsuits. So they didn't end up doing it. But at my house that night, the victims all said, no, I think we'll just let the FBI handle it and we're not going to bring any other case. And so that's what we ended up doing going forward.
And you're super resourceful when you contact someone like the police department and they give you that attitude and then you respond with, so you help.
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson. It's similar to the way you got into parties and the way you associated with people. Did you always have that ability to just think on your feet that quickly?
Yeah, my mother used to say I was sneaky. She'd say, you're a sneaky kid. I always called it smart talent. It was like common sense to me. It was kind of looking outside the box. So I always put a positive spin on it. But my adoptive mom always put a negative spin on it because I was always kind of, if everybody was doing A, I was like, okay, maybe I should be doing B. And how can I, figure out a way to make B a successful thing? Yeah, I just always kind of had that. Yeah. My father is like that. My birth father is like that. I think I inherited it, actually.
It feels like a trait that either you have it from birth or you have to work like really hard to get it. And if it's a trait, then that's great for people who aren't named Hunter Moore. Talk about the wrong person to cross at the wrong time in his life. I just want to hear about like how satisfying it was when things started to collapse for him because of the work you did.
Well, it was vindicating when the FBI proved there was hacking because everybody was calling us a liar. They were calling my daughter a whore. I mean, it was really, we were getting a lot of backlash from just regular people, from social media, from emails from strangers. And so it was, that was good when they proved the hacking. And I was happy to get him off the internet because he was obviously humiliating and damaging and violating a lot of people, thousands and thousands of victims out there. So I was very happy that his site came down and that he was no longer able to do that. And I was hoping that having him go to prison, that he would actually grow up and mature and come to realize that what he was doing was not a positive thing for the world. I mean, the guy obviously had some kind of charisma because he was able to get all these followers to come to him and do pretty much whatever he asked. And so having that kind of charisma, you would hope somebody would use it for good, to make the world better. And I always thought it was very sad that he just used it to make things worse, to make his website pure evil, like he liked to call it, to call himself a professional life ruiner and to think that was funny and to be a misogynist. And unfortunately, he hasn't changed his mindset. He's a dinosaur. He's still trapped in 2012 and doesn't understand that our society has moved on from the mindset of 2012. And he does not regret anything. He says the only thing he would have done differently is he would have jacked it up 10 times more. So I don't know if that means that he would have been trying to cause murders. I don't know what that means, but it's very sad that he hasn't changed his stance.
And where is he now? Do you know?
I've been told, and it's not confirmed, but I've been told that he's living with his parents again still. And I'm not sure what he's doing for a living, but there's one person on Twitter who came on and said that he delivered pizza for DoorDash and that he's working or was working as a delivery man for DoorDash. I don't know if he still is or was, but that's what I've been told. I have not confirmed that.
But he shouldn't be allowed on the internet.
Well, he was banned for a while, and he has been banned from Facebook. He's been suspended from Twitter now. I don't know if that's permanent or not. And, I feel like if he's not doing anything illegal, I don't really have a problem with him being on the internet, as long as he's just talking and using his speech and not doing anything illegal. I don't have any sort of vendetta against him. I don't have like, oh, I've got to get revenge or, let him be on the internet. I don't have a problem with that. There are a lot of people who do have a problem with that, but I'm not one of them, but if he starts doing illegal activity again, or, now revenge porn is actually illegal. So if he starts posting revenge porn again, then I do have a problem with that, because that's an illegal activity.
It seems like with his personality type, that's a little bit like a cult leader, similar to that. It seems inevitable that he's going to do something illegal again.
Well, supposedly he claims that it was a really bad experience in prison and he really doesn't want to go back to jail again. That has been my experience with the perpetrators of revenge porn, is they tend to be very afraid of law enforcement. They don't want to go to jail, and they're not afraid of civil suits because they tend not to have any assets. So I hope that is true, that he says that he doesn't want to go back to jail. I have also heard, and again, I haven't confirmed it, but he's on some other platform, I've been told, and he's starting to beef up his followers, and they are posting nude pictures, supposedly consensual. But I have also been told they're minors on the site, pretending to be adults, I guess. It's like he's still being himself, being the old guy that he was back in 2012. And that's a shame, because I think, it would be great if he could apologize rather than blaming everyone else, be a man and move on with his life. But I don't think that's what's happening.
It's such a shame. Like you said, he obviously has some sort of charisma because people listen to him and they follow him. And the good that you can do with that, it's just wasted. And he was planning on ratcheting it up. He was planning on creating something that was even worse than the original website that he had. And you see the trauma that everybody went through. It wasn't just exclusively females either.
That's true.
Like you said, he was a professional life ruiner. And you had mentioned your daughter, Kayla. You do like AMAs with her, right?
We did one. It was the first one we've done. It was an Instagram live, and I'm not that adept at Instagram, but she likes Instagram a lot. So we did that. That was the first time. Yeah. Just to kind of take some questions from followers.
That's super cool. And how is she doing?
Yeah, she's doing better. She almost wasn't in the documentary. She decided it was like the last day or the day before the last day of filming. And then she just at the last minute agreed to be in it. She had been saying no for a year. Ever since we were originally asked. And then she did like a half day of filming. And then she was dreading this thing coming out. She didn't even want it to come out. She was hoping like, okay, we filmed it, but I hope they don't release it. And, she has, she feels it's an important issue and that it's important that the information get out there. But at the same time, she's very afraid that it could hurt her career as a real estate agent and that clients will see her associated with a topless picture and then not want to work with her. So she's always had these mixed feelings about it. But lately she's kind of leaning into it more. And she did that Instagram live with me. So, that put her out there a little bit, so she seems like she's more comfortable with it now and embracing it. But she's doing very well. She got married about a month ago. She's a very successful agent at Coldwell Banker. And she bought her first house about a year and a half ago. And so she's doing great.
I think I misheard you. She was there filming for half a day?
Yeah, they used a lot of her, but she only did a half a day of filming. She didn't want to do it until the last minute, but they really wanted her to be in it. And I think it was good that she was, because it added a lot of texture and a lot of context. And so I thought it was excellent that she decided to do it. But yeah, she had vehemently said no for 10 years, because we had lots of production companies approaching us over a 10-year period of time. And she never wanted to be part of anything.
I really couldn't imagine it without her. She, like you said, she added all this texture and emotion, and you get to put the face to the trauma. And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. What was the experience like watching the documentary once it had been released for you and Kayla?
Well, we watched it. My husband and I watched it with the producer and director. They wanted to watch it with us before it actually aired. So we saw it 2 days before the public did. So it was still at the last minute. I thought it was very entertaining. I thought it was just flowed very well. I thought they just did an excellent job putting it together. I didn't really have any criticism of it. I just thought they did an excellent job. I think it could have been longer. I said from the beginning, they could have made like 4 or 5 episodes. I didn't think 3 was, but I guess they wanted it to be fast paced, and they didn't want people to get bored. And it is true, a lot of documentaries these days just drag on, and you think, why is this so many episodes? And this one, you don't feel that way. You say, wow, this one's short.
Netflix doesn't do that.
I will not criticize Netflix. No.
No, I agree though. Like, I almost always expect 8 episodes or 6 episodes or 4. It's rare that you get the odd number of episodes in a docuseries, I feel like. But it moves fast. It's fantastic.
Hunter spent some time in jail. He was released. Can you take us through the process of being in the courtroom when they're sentencing him and his reaction? And do you think that the sentence was fair?
Well, it was a plea deal. So he did get a very light sentence. He might have gotten more time had other victims spoken up in court. And so what had happened was the FBI had asked me to gather together victims to speak in court regarding the sentencing. So I had about 25 people kind of waiting in the wings to speak in court. But the prosecutor's office called me in and said, we don't want you to get any victims together. We're going to do it. Don't even reach out to anybody. Don't talk to anyone about it anymore. And so I didn't. And the reason why I was trying to get these victims, not only because the FBI asked me, but because I was in touch with Kamala Harris's office, and she was the Attorney General of California at the time. And she had been part of a very successful case against Kevin Bolart, who had a website called You Got Posted, and that happened in San Diego. And he got something like 18 years in prison. And the reason he got a lot of time, they told me, was because they had this string of victims literally coming up to the podium, telling their story one after the other, and it was just heart-wrenching. And so he got more time in prison. And so they had told me that's very important that you bring these people in. So I was very disappointed to get to the courthouse and find out there was no one to speak except Kayla, who was with me, who that was it, and I had a letter from one other victim, and that was the extent of the testimony. Basically, he looked once, but he'd actually never looked at me really, except like when he was walking in, he just kind of had this arrogant attitude and just kind of like, I'm going to win type of attitude. And then in the courtroom, he was sitting with his mother, father, and his attorney. And we heard his attorney, Kayla and I heard his attorney say to Hunter, is that the lady back there in the green, referring to me wearing a green jacket? And he said, yes, but he didn't look back. And his parents who were sitting there didn't look back either. And so they must have taken just so much willpower not to look back at us, if you think about it. And his leg was jiggling. He just seemed nervous with his leg. Other than his leg, you would never know he was nervous, but he was jiggling it the whole time. He basically admitted to one count of hacking, one count of identity theft. The FBI agent said that it wouldn't matter if it was 1,000 or 1, that it's going to be the same kind of sentence anyway. So it didn't really make any difference. But I think there was either 7 or 8 different victims that the FBI brought forward as part of this case. And about 6 of them were my victims that I had provided them with. And the one that Hunter said guilty to was not one of my victims, which I think is kind of interesting, that it was like, I'm not going to admit to hacking any of her victims. It has to be one of the ones that she didn't find, I don't know if that was part of the calculation, but it makes me wonder. So, then he got his about 2.5 years in prison, and it wasn't really, later I learned it wasn't that much of a prison. I think he was in different institutions, which were more like camps. I understand the one in Texas, it was like drug and alcohol rehab centers. And the one in Texas, the inmates could walk up to the store by themselves, unsupervised, get their food, whatever, and come back unsupervised. So it doesn't seem like much of a prison to me, but that was where he was. And I think he only served 2 years or maybe a little less than 2 years, and he's out now.
And what about the other individual that assisted him with the hacking?
Well, Charlie Evans, I think he got like 2 or 2.5 years in prison, and I have not kept up with him at all. I mean, I know in court, he did apologize to Kayla. He looked back and said, I'm sorry, which meant a lot to her, actually, because Hunter Moore certainly didn't have any remorse whatsoever. So we don't know anything about what Charlie Evans is doing, but he grew up in the neighborhood that Kayla was raised in. He went to high school about a block from the house that Kayla and I lived in. So he was definitely from our community, and Kayla had 6 Facebook friends in common with him. She didn't know him directly, but she definitely knew people who knew him.
Is that how she was targeted?
Well, what he started doing is he started hacking his own Facebook friends first, which is amazing, and taking their nude pictures and uploading those, which is kind of a crazy thing to be doing to your so-called friends. And then he would get into one person's account and he would reach out and then get into other people through that person. And because he was doing it, it was random. And yet he started with his own friends and then other friends of theirs and then friends of theirs. And that's how Kayla got tangled up in that, because she knew some of the same people as Charlie Evans.
When you hear the word hack, like I got hacked into, you think that there's this computer genius, this mastermind who's going on the dark web and breaking down code and doing it that way. But the hacking technique that they used was pretty basic.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
It was like social engineering. So there was some kind of a two-factor authentication where, like if you claim that you lost your password to, I guess it was Gmail, they had a way of sending like a code to you, and then you would be able to reset it with that code. And so I guess what the hacker was doing is he would lose the password. He would claim that the person lost the password. Then he would contact the person and say, oh, hi, this is, was Haley. In Kayla's case, it was her best friend, Haley. He was pretending to be Haley. He was already in Haley's account. And he said, hi, Kayla, this is Haley. Oh, I lost my password. I have to reset it. They're going to send you the code because my email's messed up. Can you give me the code? And so Kayla would say, oh, sure. And she'd give the code to Haley, who was really Charlie Evans. And then all of a sudden he would have control of Kayla's account. And then he would get a control of her Facebook and other accounts as well. That's how he worked it. But there are people who also can completely hack, because I had a bunch of viruses put on my computer on different occasions during this fight against Hunter Moore. And these were people who actually knew how to really hack. So that can also happen.
And they were friends or associates of Hunter, you believe?
I mean, I'm guessing it's followers of his. I don't have any idea who it was, but there was also a stalker outside my house. I believe that he was trying to hack into our network. I confronted him. This wasn't in the documentary. I'm not quite sure why it was left out, because I thought it was, kind of a relevant thing. But anyway, he was there one day. Kayla saw the car sitting out there, but didn't tell me till the next day. And then that night, the second night, he was sitting out there again, and I just marched out there. I was like really fed up at this point. This was way like a year into it. It was, it was way into it. And I marched out there and I said, may I help you? And Kayla was running behind me going, Mom, what are you going to do? Mom, what are you going to do? And the kid just looks up at me. It was like a 20-something-year-old guy, blonde curly hair, doing something in his lap. He looks up, freaks out, turns on his car, zooms away, almost hits our neighbor's wall. And I just feel like he had to be guilty, because who would do that? If you were waiting for a neighbor, you'd say, oh, I'm just waiting for your neighbor. Or, you wouldn't just zoom away and freak out like that. And there was a guy in court. I have to admit, when Hunter was in court, there was a blonde, curly haired guy with him. I don't know if it was the same guy. I can't say for sure, but there was a guy that sort of fit that description.
That's wild.
And speaking of court, you mentioned Hunter's parents. Did they seem terribly embarrassed over their son's behavior? What was your read on them?
They seem like staunch defenders of him. That's what I would say. They ignored me. They didn't seem happy with me, as far as I could tell. They were by his side.
And you also received death threats. One of them, at least, was put in the docu-series, and you just mentioned the individual who was outside your house. Was there anything else that was going on in that time that we didn't see on the series that was significant like that?
Well, I went undercover. They didn't put that in. I was surprised. At one point, there was a victim who wanted to serve legal papers to Hunter. And so I agreed to be a witness to that and help with that. And she wanted to we were going to serve the papers in Long Beach when he was being a DJ. And so I put on this ridiculous getup. I had this white pasty makeup, dark sunglasses, a black wig, a beatnik beret, a tacky velvet jacket. And I drove down to Long Beach. I parked my car in this huge parking lot with all these other cars. I locked the door, I turn around, and Hunter Moore is standing there looking at me. It was so coincidental. He was with 3 other kids. He did not recognize me, and they were walking to a van. So they just walked onto the van. And that was the first time I'd actually came face to face with him in person. He just didn't know it was me. But one of his friends did seem to recognize me later in the evening. So I kind of made a beeline for the car, and the guy watched me as I drove away. So he may have recognized me, or maybe he just thought, who is this kooky looking lady? I don't know.
How did that not make the docu-series?
I don't know. They filmed me in the crazy getup. I mean, they made me put the whole thing on again, and we did a bunch of filming in it, but didn't make it. I don't know.
If there was 4 episodes, it would have.
Those, I know, 4, it would have been in there, and the stalker would have been in there too.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program. What was it like when you saw him for the first time?
Well, I mean, it shocked me that he was standing right there looking at me, because, I didn't expect that, especially in this big parking lot when I just parked the car. And then I went into, it was the way it was set up. It was almost like a motel, but it was huge. It was like the biggest motel I've ever seen. And they had all these conference rooms and different buildings of motel rooms all over this huge property. And so Hunter had one room that he was playing DJ in. And there were bands in a lot of other rooms. So it was like this big gathering of all these different bands and groups and people. But Hunter's room didn't have very many people in it, which really surprised me, because he had 600,000 followers on Twitter. So I was like, wow, I thought he was so popular. It really surprised me. So he came in he got his laptop out to be DJ, right? And he was going to be playing the music from his laptop. But at the very beginning, he had this cup of beer and he threw it straight into the air, and it all came down on his laptop, which messed up the laptop. So the whole time that he's trying to play music, it's sputtering and it's going off, and he has to try to get it back on. I mean, it was a complete disaster. So that's what happened it was his own man-made disaster.
Pretty profound. He was his own man-made disaster. I mean, that's
right.
I would say very true in a lot of ways. Was there anything else that the series left out that you'd like to talk about here, or that you were surprised they left out?
I mean, there were other victims who played a big part in this whole thing and had amazing stories, and they were left out because they refused to be on camera, and the film crew, they just didn't feel that they should be doing the stories unless the person's actually going to come on themselves to tell the story. So there was this one victim who kind of became my sidekick. I call her Mandy. She helped me with a lot of the research and a lot of the investigation. And she was from Iran. And so she was particularly freaked out about having a topless picture online. Her father was pushing her to go back to Iran to visit relatives. And she knew that she could actually be nabbed by the authorities. She could be put to death for something like having a topless picture online. And she didn't want to even tell her family about it. So she was desperately trying to get that picture down, telling her father, I can't go back. And he's like, yes, you're going to go back with us. So there was a big tension with that. And she ended up paying an attorney $10,000 and still didn't get her picture down. And her attorney had served Hunter in a club where he was a DJ up in Northern California. He had torn the papers into shreds, the process server gave him the papers, and he just angrily tore everything and threw it all over the club. And it freaked her out so much that she decided not to even pursue further legal action because she was so afraid of him. That was to me a kind of amazing story. And unfortunately, that story didn't end up in the documentary. And there were other stories too. So. And
do you have any contact still? Do you maintain any contact with the people, the former victims, and even this sidekick?
The last time I talked to them was probably maybe as much as a year ago or 8 months ago. It was a little while back. So I haven't talked to them too recently, but I mean, I've talked to them throughout the years because this all happened 10 years ago. So I have periodically spoken with them. But most of them just want to forget about this period in their life. I mean, they're like my daughter. They just don't even want to be reminded that this happened. It was so traumatic for them. So they're just like, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want to be in the documentary. They're afraid their pictures could come back up and resurface. Even my daughter, there's websites out there that are claiming they have my daughter's pictures, which they don't. It's some other girl, but they're claiming it's my daughter. So, my daughter is still being harassed with, oh, we've got your pictures. Or people are saying, oh, your pictures are on XYZ site. And it's not her, it's some other girl.
What are your feelings on the revenge porn laws that are out there in place as of now? Do you think they're strict enough?
Well, we definitely need a federal law. And we've had a lot of problem getting that passed. We've had 3 different measures brought forward, and the final one, it doesn't look like it's going to pass. Congresswoman Jackie Speer is the one who brought it forth, and she says there's only about a 4% chance it's going to pass, and she is leaving office in November. So it's not clear who would, push it after she leaves. The ACLU has been the biggest obstacle because they consider revenge porn to be speech and they don't want any hindrances to speech. And they were fighting me too when I was working on a law in California way back when. So they've always been an obstacle. And the new obstacle for Congress is that there's certain members of the progressive side of the Democratic Party who have the defund the police mindset, and they just don't want additional laws putting people in prison. So they're against it as well. So that's also made it difficult for Jackie Speer. And there's also some group, I can't remember what it's called, but she says it's a group that believes that somehow the minorities are more impacted than white people when it comes to this, which is hard for me to comprehend because the perpetrators tend to be white males and the victims tend to be white females. So I don't know why this group would think that minorities are, more impacted in a negative way if a law passes, but apparently they've also been a little bit of an obstacle too, is what I've been told. We have laws right now in 49 states, but they're very, very weak and they mostly are misdemeanor and they just kind of a slap on the wrist.
How is this considered in any way freedom of speech?
I don't think it is. I think revenge porn should be an exception to the First Amendment, along with child pornography and incitement and libel and the others. I think it should be clearly spelled out that it's an exception to the First Amendment. So to me, it's not speech. We have certain things that are privacy concerns. I mean, you're not allowed to put somebody's social security number out online. I mean, that's not legal. It shouldn't be legal to put a nude picture of them either. To me, it's kind of common sense. There's no positive thing to putting out nude pictures of someone. It's completely negative in every sense of the word. So it's something that we should not allow as a society.
If that passes, I can pretty much say, and I'm not an expert in it, but I can pretty much say it's not going to spiral out of control. And the next thing you know, you can't criticize, a news program. Like, we're not going into by passing that is not going to put us into some state where you can't even criticize a public official. Like, it's not going to spiral that quickly.
Right. No, it's completely different than speech. Yeah, it's different from words. And I mean, I'm actually very much a free speech advocate. So I don't like what the tech companies are doing. I don't like all this censorship. I feel like a lot of it's politically motivated. I think a lot of it's biased. So I don't support the idea of them silencing various individuals or kicking them off the platform. In general, I don't support that. But revenge porn is a different story.
Yeah, it seems to me posting pictures against somebody's will like that is closer to an assault than freedom of speech. That's crazy.
It's a sex crime to me. It's a form of sexual assault. And it's funny because when I first said that back in 2012, everybody attacked me for making that comment. That was just such, it was so outrageous to people in this country that someone would associate that as a sex crime. And now it's accepted. So that's how much we've changed as a society.
Great point. Yeah. And I think if it seems like if you look at the effects of what has happened to folks who have had their explicit photos shared against their will, I would say that's more comparable.
Yeah, there are two girls who committed suicide over revenge porn. One of them is Audrey Pott from Northern California, and another girl was Retta Parsons from Canada. And these girls had not been on Hunter's site. But what happened was they were both sexually assaulted by multiple guys at the same time. So they went through these horrible rapes, but they were going on with their life until the photos surfaced. And both girls, when the photos came in surfaced, they both killed themselves. So their parents, both parents told me, they said that the revenge porn to their daughters was worse than actual rape. That was how those two girls felt about it, because they didn't feel there was any escape from it. Rape is really horrible, but you can try to forget about it. You can never tell anybody about it. You can do all of that, compartmentalize. But the thing about revenge porn, it follows you everywhere. The internet is everywhere. It's forever. So you go to a new city, it can follow you. You go to a new job, it can follow you. It can get you fired. It can ruin your relationships. So you just don't feel like you can escape from it.
And what's the end game? This wasn't one of my questions that I wrote down, but I just wonder, like, what's the end game there to ruin someone's life, to put that out there, ruin their life, and then you hear that person committed suicide likely because of what you did. Is that the end game?
I mean, it seemed like it was a game to the people in Hunter Moore's cult, and they got their jollies off of other people's misery. I think they had very hollow lives. It made them feel better to hurt others. So the goal, I guess, was, getting them fired or driving them to suicide. I mean, it probably depended on the person, as to what the goal was. Probably many of them had a hatred for women. I mean, a lot of these women have hatred for women because a lot of his followers are female. It's not like they were all males. It was probably 50-50. I mean, there are quite a few females who were taunting other women.
You did a great job in your own personal investigation as a civilian, and I'm wondering what your relationship with law enforcement is like now. Did anyone reach out to you after from the police and say, hey, you did a really good job here?
No, nobody's ever reached out to me. But I mean, I wouldn't expect them to. But yeah, I thought that the lead FBI agent, Jeff Kirkpatrick, who was in the documentary, I mean, he did a particularly good job. I don't know for sure, but I kind of had heard a rumor that he kind of was the one who talked the FBI into pursuing this case, and that they might not have done it had Jeff not talked him into it. So I don't know if that's true. They didn't say it in the documentary, but I think maybe the filmmakers told me that, or someone told me that.
So the police department didn't give you an honorary badge or deputize you?
Well, the police department's probably not very happy that I criticized them. And once I took it to the FBI, I called back the Los Angeles Police Department to tell them they could close the file. And it was so funny what this woman said to me, this detective. She said, "What, you think they're better than we are?" I thought that was so funny, like this competition that she somehow has going with the FBI.
I thought that was only in the movies.
No, it's actually apparently real.
I only have one more question. Tim, do you have any other?
No, go for it.
You had 30-something jobs, but I didn't see podcaster listed there. When are you starting your RSS feed?
I'm going to leave it up to you guys. I'm not planning to be a podcaster.
Don't say never.
Yeah, I won't say never, but yeah. You never know, actually.
Charlotte, it's been wonderful to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
And I'm no longer intimidated. This totally
all right.
alleviated all of that. So.
That's great. All righty, take care.